Hi, I'm Arthur Pitts, and I'm here to talk to you about Ukraine, in particular, Crimea. I think I need to begin with the 1994 Budapest Memorandum, where the Russian Federation, Ukraine, Belarus, Kazakhstan, the United States, and UK, along with others, made an agreement. The agreement was Ukraine, which had the third largest nuclear arsenal in the world, left over from the collapse of the Soviet Union, was in a position to divest of its nukes if Russia agreed to certain conditions. And the conditions that the Russian Federation agreed to were that Russia would respect Ukraine's territorial integrity and sovereignty over its territory. They also agreed that they would not make any threats or actual economic sanctions or threats of military action or actual military action to try and change the borders or government. And the UK and the United States were guarantors of this agreement. China and France supported this agreement at the time. So what's happened? Well, Putin's seizure of Crimea in 2014 violated that agreement. It was a fait accompli. By the time he had taken it, there wasn't much that could be done to reverse it. But the United States did apply some serious economic sanctions on Russia at the time. Not enough, however, to make Russia relent. And it's doubtful that Congress would have approved at that time anything else. The Republicans were in charge, and they were not interested in giving Obama any kind of victory. So let's fast forward to the Russian invasion that Putin ordered of Ukraine. What was the purpose here? This really didn't have much to do with NATO expansion, because it was pretty clear that Ukraine was not in a position yet to even qualify for being a member of NATO. He's used that as propaganda, but that's not the actual reason. The reason really is that Putin believes that Ukraine has no right to exist independently of Mother Russia. He has a distorted view of history to support this line of thinking. So his purpose was to wipe Ukraine as a separate country off the map. And he really thought he could accomplish this rather easily. Obviously, he dismally failed. The army was not up to it. The money that had been allocated for it had wound up in Russia's kleptocracy. So the army was in very poor shape and still is. So what to do now? Ukraine has been attempting, and with some success, at gaining territory back. The question that I have right now is, what about Crimea? Russia has been building defense systems to protect Ukraine, to protect Crimea from any attack by Ukraine. Also been building fortifications on the routes that would lead to Crimea. Now, can Ukraine do anything about this? And I would offer this idea. If you look carefully at images of Russia's defenses that they've built for Ukraine, They're complicated, but they are missing communication trenches. They're not. It's not complete by any means, and their army is stretched thin, trying to defend their other territories that they've taken. So what can be done? Well, I'm mindful of that the Russian defenses are all pointed north to try and defend Crimea, against any attack by Ukraine. But that reminds me of the British in Singapore. The British in Singapore had heavy defenses, but they were all pointed in a direction that they thought the Japanese had to attack from. Surprise, the Japanese came down the Malayan Peninsula through the jungle and actually had a rather easy time of overwhelming the British from behind. Well, could that happen in Crimea? Well, as it turns out, Ukraine has been attacking weapons storage. They have destroyed a cache of cruise missiles in Crimea. They have attacked other Russian assets in Crimea with success. So does Ukraine have the capacity to send its special forces, troops, behind Russian lines? In other words, make it look like you're attacking in front, but in fact, you're attacking from the rear. Now, I'm not a military man, but having studied other wars, that seems like a feasible option to me. Now, I don't know enough about Ukraine's capacities, if they can do that, but that's certainly a potential option. Another option would be to take over the roads that lead towards Crimea from the east, shut it off from Russia. That is feasible and possible. So there are things that Ukraine could do if its goal is Crimea. And I believe at some point they really want Crimea back. It won't be easy, whatever method they choose, but they do have options, and maybe options that the Russians don't have enough troops to prepare for. So if you look at a good map of Crimea, and you look at where the defenses are, the Russians have built up their defense in Sevastopol, for example, but they have not built defenses pointing south up in the north. They have not. Maybe they are assuming that Ukraine would have to attack from there, and there are really only two ways that they can approach by land to do that, and those are fragile places to try and attack. So I'm suggesting to you that looking at history as a guide of what the Japanese did in Singapore is worth considering here as a possibility for Ukraine. Deception would be needed, but Ukraine has proven to be pretty good at it. They've been able to build dummy tanks and armored personnel carriers and so forth that would fool even a drone. So they might be able to do that. So where else might they attack? Besides Crimea itself from behind, or the roads to it, the other possibility is to attack in the north, where they have been successful before, or they find someplace in between. And the Russian forces are stretched, and the Russian army is not very good. Now, typically, the defense has the advantages, especially if they have like fortified bunkers and so forth, which I would guess that the Russians have in their defenses in Ukraine. It's staggered, 3 different layers of trenches and fortifications pointing towards the north. So that's my thoughts. And the Ukrainian government is in a position where they've made it real clear and they're not going to seek peace with Putin until they have gained their territory back. And Putin's made it very clear that he's not going to sue for peace. And now, he may have no choice. He's threatened the use of tactical nuclear weapons, but I think he would run into one heck of a problem doing that. NATO retaliation would be very likely. So I don't think he wants to take that route. Now, Putin will act, I believe, if he believes his own position is threatened, if his life is threatened. He is not as calculating as some would like to think he is. If he was, then he would have easily taken over Ukraine, but he didn't. So those are my thoughts for now on what can be done about Ukraine. Now, the United States appears to be worried that if the Ukrainians attack, they might be too successful, that the Russians might panic, chaos would ensue. The Russian government might collapse. The Russian army could collapse. Then what do you do? And so it seems to me that the United States has been careful to try and make sure that doesn't happen, and not providing Ukraine with enough serious weaponry to be able to do that. So far, that can change, and it's clear that some countries in NATO, like Slovakia, are supplying serious warplanes to Ukraine. Germany is providing Leopard tanks, which Russia has no equivalent to defend against, except their artillery and trenches and so forth. So that's the situation as I see it. I am concerned that there's a part of the Republican Party that it reminds me of the America Firsters in the 30s, that Ukraine is too far away, it's not that important. As Tucker Carlson put it, it's just a border dispute. That's not helpful, because this is not a border dispute. This is a conflict over the existence of Ukraine. And the Russian, there are members, 19 congressmen, who seem to be leaning towards forgetting, not keeping our commitment to aid Ukraine. They're worried, some of it is legitimate fear that we're drawing down our own reserves too much. The solution for that is pretty obvious. You get our system back up in full production. That takes a while, but it can be done. So there is in the background, and Putin is counting on this, that the West, particularly the United States, will wash its hands of it. And our record in things like this is not good. Just look at our chaotic retreat from Kabul. years, decades earlier, I remember the even worse debacle in Saigon at the end of the Vietnam War. So we don't have the best history in terms of keeping our promises. So there are concerns there. On the other hand, NATO is strengthened, and Putin's actions have strengthened NATO. Finland has a first-class military, and I don't believe the Russians are going to be dumb enough to attack them. Maybe cyber warfare. They've done that before, like in Estonia. But I think the Finns are high-tech and quite capable of defending themselves. Putin's made threats, but I don't think he has the capacity to seriously threaten Finland. If Sweden gets in, Sweden really has also a first-class military. So NATO is seriously strengthened, and that's all thanks to Putin. Unintended consequences are very important in history. And on that note, I'm going to close this talk. I plan to have regular presentations coming up. Thank you, and I hope this was of interest to you.